All right, so in the last video, we talked about decimal point data types. So the float and the double, which allow you to store numbers like 3.14 or 2.71 or something like that, as well as really big numbers. We saw numbers up to like 1.8 times 10 to the 308th, I believe. So we're just going to cover the last two data types, the last two primitive data types, which are the Boolean and the Char. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to copy the whole things anymore. These data types are a lot, I don't know if simpler is the right word, but they're definitely different. So they're not numbers, so they're not going to follow the same form that we've been using. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just grab the two printout kind of intro lines, and I'm going to copy it down here. I'll do one for the double, and I'll go ahead and just copy this one down here for the char. Okay, so we'll go ahead and change double here to Boolean, and then we'll change double down here to char. Okay, so at this point, I'll go ahead and I will just comment out all this code for now. So just kind of highlight it all and Control /. And so the Boolean has two values, right? Where the numbers almost had an infinite number of different values like a double or a float could take on, and we saw with the whole numbers it was a very discrete number, right? It was maybe 4 billion for the integer. Boolean is much simpler, right? It's just true or false. So we'll just make this very simple, and I'm just going to kind of hard code the only two answers that you could actually have. So I'm going to go ahead and do a System.out.printf. And I'll say something like this. I'll go ahead and close those quotes, and we'll say Booleans can take on two values. Okay, and those two values, I'll go ahead and I'll just put %s, and we'll format this in just a second. But I'll go ahead and put Boolean. We'll use the Boolean wrapper class, so Boolean dot, and you can see those values right there, true, and Boolean dot false. And we'll go ahead and add that semicolon at the end. Okay, so now if we play this, we'll see Boolean data type. Booleans can take on two values, true, false. Okay, so now you can see the char data type is running on a little bit. So let's go ahead and format this. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and add two new line characters there to give it a little bit of breathing room. And then I'll go ahead and I'll add a new line right before each one of these. So I'll delete that space and put a new line there. Okay, so now we'll kind of put them on their own line. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll just add a tab right before those values. So it'll be right before the %s, we'll add a \t right before both of those. So now it can kind of just print it a little bit nicer. So Booleans can take on two values, true and false. Okay. Now if we want to read a particular value, we would do something like this. We would go ahead, I'll go ahead and just copy the code we had up here. And we'll go ahead and uncomment this. Okay, so now it says instead of please enter a whole number, we'll go ahead and we'll say please enter a Boolean. Okay, so we'll say please enter a Boolean, and we no longer need all these extra parameters. So we'll go ahead and just make this a System.out.print. And then instead of reading in a double, we're going to read in a Boolean. So we'll say Boolean bool equals scan.next Boolean. Okay. And then the System.out.print, we're basically just going to, we'll just delete the line there. Okay, we'll just go ahead and say System.out.printf, and we'll go ahead and we'll put a tab there, and we'll say you entered %s, and then we'll put bool in there. Okay, so now if I try this, I can type in true, and gave us a problem. I think we have to do okay, let's see what's wrong here. Oh, I see. Okay. Instead of next Boolean, I accidentally did has next Boolean. So we always read in using the next data type. So next Boolean, next double, next float, whatever that is. So let's give this one more try. I'll type in true. Okay, and the last thing I want to do is I want to change this to a B, and we'll give this a try. Okay, we're still not having any luck here. Let's go ahead and, oh, okay, I see why. I have to delete this double D first because it's reading in true using the next dot double. Okay, so we'll go ahead and delete that. I'm going to change this back to S for now. And we'll go ahead and run it. And now, there we go. You entered true. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll do some new lines after that. So now we do true. You entered true. Do false. You entered false. Okay, obviously if we do something else, it's going to give us this input mismatch because ADSF DSF is not a Boolean. Okay, likewise if I did true with a capital T, it looks like it takes that in just fine actually. So a little bit of flexibility when you're reading in. You can do false or true as a capitalized. Now what I don't know, I've never tried this, kind of shout it out. It appears that it basically takes this and probably does forces it to lowercase and kind of compares it with the lowercase value of true and false. Okay, so the very last thing we're going to do now is with the char data type. Okay, so a Boolean could hold values true and false, whereas a char can hold basically any letter or character on your keyboard, for instance. You can hold different characters as well that aren't on your keyboard, but for all practical purposes, that's typically what we use chars for. So I'll go ahead and just write this one from scratch. We'll say System.out.print. Please enter a character. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say please enter a character, and then we'll go ahead and read that in. Okay, so we'll say char C equals scan.next. Now notice there's no next char. Okay, so if we do next, you'll see there's no next char, there's a next byte, next double, next float, all those ones that we've already used. What we actually have to do is we have to grab a string. Okay, I'm going to kind of do this step by step. Instead of a char C, I'm going to say this as a string. We'll talk about strings in depth in the next lesson, but I'll go ahead and say string S equals next. Okay, just to kind of show you how this works. And then I'll go ahead and I'll System.out.printf. I'll say with a tab, you entered %S and then a new line. And then I'll go ahead and put the S in there. Okay, so this time, if I type in something, let's say true for the Boolean and then hello. Okay, it basically, when I say string.next, it grabs the whole next word out there. Okay, now again, we're gonna talk about strings in detail in the next lesson. So I'll kind of leave it for now. Don't get too caught up in what's going on right here. But the thing I want to point out is this next will read a whole string, which is basically like an entire word out there. Okay, so what I can actually do is I just want the one character. And so what I actually need to do is I'll go ahead and I'll say .next. That's going to get me a string, and then I can do dot to get a bunch of other methods to call based off of that word hello, and I'm going to actually say char at 0. Okay, and that's going to get me the very first character. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this now. I'm going to change the string S to a char. So a char holds just one letter, and a string can hold multiple letters, including spaces. But in this case, when we said scan.next, you can see it basically had 5 different letters in there. And the way this works is we had H, E, L, L, O, and each of these letters has a specific what's called index to it. Okay, and that index is usually referred to using the letter I. Is it 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4? Okay, so if I say get me out of that word, right, scan.next is going to read that word hello in, and then it's saying get me the character at index 0, which is going to be the H. Okay, so I'll go ahead this time and I'm going to print out C here. Okay, so let's go ahead and, looks like I have an error I need to fix. Oh, this is obviously not code, so it's not compiling. So I'll do the true, and then I'll do hello. Okay, so now you can see it just grabs that 0th character. So now, for instance, if I change it to 1 and I tried it again, then it's going to get that first character, which is really the second one, but it's at index 1, which is the E. Okay, so for that reason, I usually just put a 0 there, and then we can do true, and then usually I'll just type in one character, like the H. Okay, so again, we'll talk all about these indices as it relates to strings, and then later on when we get into loops, we'll go much more in depth to this. But for now, you can just kind of take it for granted that, hey, a string has a number of characters in it, and each character has a very specific index number to it, starting at 0 and going all the way up to the length of the string minus 1. So here, hello is 5 characters, so we go from 0 to 4. Okay. All right, so we've got all of our code in place, and now I just want to go back and uncomment everything and make sure that it looks like it's all working. Okay, so I'm gonna go back up here where I had all this commented code, and I'm gonna do my control /. I'm gonna save it. Don't see any errors, so that's good. So now I'm gonna come up, and everywhere where I had these comments up here, I'll go ahead and I'll highlight it, and I'll control / to uncomment. Do have a few errors. I'll go ahead and fix those, and actually go ahead and fix those now, so because everything else is uncommented. So we'll see what the problem is down here in the float. We had redefined our num bits. We had already defined that up higher. So we'll go ahead and just delete that int right there in both of those places. And now what we should see is we should be able to run this program from scratch. So please enter a whole number for a byte. So we'll do maybe 44. And then for a short, oops, that was out of range. So we'll do 44 for a byte, 4,444 for a short. For an int, we'll do we'll do 44 million, which fits into that range. And then for a long, we'll do an even bigger number. Looks like millions, billions, 444 billion. For a float, we can do even bigger, right? And for a double, we can do something truly huge. Okay. And finally, for the Boolean, we'll read in a value of true. And for char, we'll read in the letter Q. Okay. All right, so we have successfully looked at all the primitive data types. For the whole numbers, we looked at byte, short, int, and long. For decimal point numbers, we looked at float and double. And then for all the other non-number primitive data types, we looked at Boolean for true and false, and char to hold all the different letters of the alphabet. All right, so thanks for visiting us with this lesson, and we'll see you later in lesson 3.